Our next story includes references to suicide. In Israel, the number of soldiers suffering from trauma and mental health issues after being deployed to Gaza is rising. Our senior international correspondent, Fanny Facsar, has been speaking with a former soldier in Tel Aviv who says he's struggling to cope and that more transparency around suicide rates is needed. The Israeli military told DW their data is transparent, documented and publicly available.
No. Flashbacks do occur. I don't like the sound of drones or loud noises or crowded places. We've been in a fighting zone.
Gil has been back from Gaza since 2024. He often wakes up in the middle of the night, he says, out of worry for his comrades.
I think when this war ends, if it ended or not, it's hard to tell, but I think we're gonna have a massive wave of suicides that we're not ready to deal with. This is the part that does keep me up at night in a way, because I have no way of knowing if any of my friends are going down that path.
When Gil was deployed to central Gaza at the start of the war in 2023, as a combat soldier, he found himself living with his comrades in homes of Palestinian families. He says he and his fellow soldiers were unprepared for the war's relentless brutality.
There wasn't a road really where I could look at the road and know this is such and such street. It was just bulldozed and bombed to an extent where you can't even look at the map. And we would get the stench of death coming in every day around 6 p.m. when the wind changed. First a burning smell, burning plastic, and then smell of rotten meat.
Gil took these photos in Gaza and claims he did not kill anyone, but he had explicit orders to shoot to kill on sight if anyone came within 300 meters. He recalls detaining a Palestinian man.
Later they told us we were supposed to shoot him, and we told them back, well, he wasn't armed. This is not what we came here for.
He believes incidents like this have led to a mental health crisis among soldiers.
Some soldiers say their experiences on duty push them across moral lines. Others are struggling with the trauma of combat and losing comrades. It is driving some to take their own lives. Official figures show that nearly 300 soldiers attempted suicide in the 19 months to July this year. 36 soldiers committed suicide.
Tuly Flint, who works with soldiers returning from Gaza, is not surprised by the rise in suicide attempts. He says many are grappling with profound moral injuries that weigh heavily on their conscience.
In moral injury, something that you did that you were not able to prevent from happening is against your values in such a way that your whole value system is shattered. And repairing this is a lifelong journey.
Some soldiers believed they were defending Israel, only to later realize their actions may have been war crimes, leaving them haunted by guilt.
You know, committing crimes is not good to anyone. But crimes of war, this shatters the soul. And when you leave your reserve duty and you have a warrant for the next period in Gaza in 2 months' time, your brain, your nervous system, your soul cannot recover in between.
Many soldiers say they want to share their experiences, but feel unheard.
I think releasing data about suicide cases would go a long way to build trust, because me and a lot of other people get the sense for years on years that the army is trying to not disclose the amount of suicide cases.
The Israeli army does not publish regular figures about suicides or suicide attempts. They are often treated as a private matter. Critics like Gil argue this would help others to be seen and heard and deal with their trauma.
Well, that report from DW's Fanny Facsar, who joins us now from Jerusalem. Welcome, Fanny. Israel has fought numerous wars. What appears to be different about this war in Gaza?
I think the most obvious here is really the death toll. Tens of thousands of people have been killed during the past 2 years, most of them through Israeli military attacks. And while we are speaking about at least 70,000 of people killed, and this is an estimate here, about direct consequences of the war, we haven't even spoken about the indirect consequences of any war. And here in particular, this is the limited access to food, the limited access to healthcare and shelter, which also meant that the death toll overall has increased. So we're talking about a huge death toll. We're talking about a war that's been fought for at least 2 years, because yes, there is a formal ceasefire which to some degree holds, while Hamas militants and Israel both accuse each other of having allegedly violated the ceasefire multiple times. It is also a massive ground operation that's been going on here that we can only probably compare to the 2014 Gaza war to some level. And overall, it's probably the most controversial war ever that Israel has been waging, because various human rights organizations and UN bodies have accused Israel of allegedly having committed war crimes. In fact, just most recently in September, a UN-backed commission report said that they concluded that Israel allegedly committed various acts of genocide. That Israel, they point out, the final conclusion, Israel allegedly has committed genocide, which Israel completely rejects, because they say they've been rooting out Hamas militants, and they're still doing that, because as the ceasefire to some degree holds, nearly every day I receive an announcement by the IDF that apparently some people have crossed over that so-called yellow line, which separates Gaza right now in two parts, and they say that these were militants. It's very hard for us to verify any of this, because we are not on the ground. We are not allowed to report independently from Gaza. And overall, going back again to the sheer number of people who have been killed in this war, of course, raises a lot of questions, especially the question of accountability and among soldiers, their responsibility in this war.
And so how is the IDF responding to these allegations?
We have reached out to the IDF specifically with the allegations that Gil, the soldier here in this report, has made, be it with regard to the mental health support. And the IDF said that they do see post-traumatic disorder after being dispatched from active duty as a quote, legitimate injury, and that they're providing enough support. They're also saying that they're providing regular numbers. For them, providing numbers every year is regular enough. But a lot of critics are saying that these numbers, especially because just the way I've been describing the difference of this war with regard to so many others, this war is so different that people who attempt to commit suicide, they feel more transparency. But not only those who attempt to commit suicide, people with mental health problems in general who've been part of this war, it would help them so much more to cope with their so-called moral injury. If these numbers would be provided on a monthly basis, if there was even more talk about it, public debate about the so-called moral reckoning, because what we have heard in this report by the Israeli soldier going on camera is still very rare. There are multiple reports, especially anonymously in Israeli newspapers, but this is just starting, in fact, as the dust settles somewhat in Gaza. And overall, when we asked them, what about the allegations, in particular, shooting at civilians, shooting at Palestinians who are unarmed, they told us that the IDF prohibits intentional or deliberate shooting at civilians. Well, there will be a lot of questions then asked, obviously, once one can talk about really this war from being over, because again, I have to point at the sheer number of people killed and the accusations by various human rights organizations and UN bodies that a lot of these people have died specifically because they were killed intentionally and deliberately by Israeli military forces.
Thanks for that, Fanny Facsar in Jerusalem. Well, you saw Tuly Flint in that report. He's an expert in trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder recovery therapy. He's also a former IDF reservist and joins us now from Ramat Gan in Israel. Welcome to DW. Do you share Gil's fears of what he called a massive wave of suicide following this war?
I share Gil's fear of a massive wave of post-traumatic soldiers that would need therapy. And the suicide is the tip of the iceberg of the phenomena that PTSD carries with. The problem will be violence, deteriorating ability to cope in day-to-day life, students losing their academic careers, and people losing their jobs and their ability to maintain relationship. All these deprive people from their resources, and then they might find themselves in a situation where they would go to suicide. So suicide is the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And we are not talking only about the soldiers, we're talking about a ripple effect, because the soldier has friends, families, spouses, or children.
And I wonder,
all of them are affected.
Is this what you would expect when troops and reservists come home from active service, or is there something particular about this war?
This war is the longest one that we ever had, and it's also the most controversial one. Although the first Lebanon war was controversial, it ended up, and then there was a time that the IDF stayed in Lebanon. But this war, when a soldier goes to war believing that he is there in order to protect his country and to rescue the hostages, and there are no more hostages already, living hostages over there, and the war and the horrors of war and the war crimes that were committed in unheard of amount of war crimes that people report when they come back, this is what will shatter the ability to maintain a well-being and to recover from war. It's because not everybody, but those.
And of course, you're talking about the testimony of people who have been there and lived through this, where they come back and say this, where the Israeli government and the IDF, of course, deny that war crimes have been committed.
I'm not talking for the Israeli army or for the government.
Interesting.
I'm just listening to my clients.
No, absolutely. But I wonder if that sort of adds to the problems that the soldiers then face, because they're saying one thing, and the people who ordered them to do these things are saying something completely else.
One of the things that someone who has been through trauma needs is someone from the superiors to take responsibility and to admit that bad things have happened. And when those soldiers come back and people deny and lie and tell them that they are the liars, they find themselves in a situation of loneliness and despair. They feel that they are powerless against the PTSD symptoms, they are also helpless because no one acknowledges the fact that bad things took place. And then they feel very lonely and like no one can help them.
There's a different point of view, though. We have some experts saying that an increase in suicide numbers, which, as you say, is just the tip of the iceberg, but they would say that an increase in suicide numbers may simply reflect the increase in people seeing active duty than rather than necessarily any greater psychological pressure associated with this particular war.
I don't know the statistics enough, and nobody knows the statistics enough, because not all the soldiers, unfortunately, not all the soldiers have left Gaza Strip already. And as an activist for peace and equality, I would call the government to withdraw from Gaza now. Only when all the soldiers will come back and we will get back all the weapons and people will start to come back to the day-to-day life, we will be able to start assessing how many people suffer from PTSD, how many people are in jeopardy of committing suicide, and only then will we know the real numbers of Palestinian sufferers from PTSD and Israeli sufferers from PTSD. Right. And also, when we think about that, as I said, we need to look at people who suffer from PTSD, not only the ones who commit suicide or attempt suicide, because when you have a prolonged PTSD, it's not only right after the war that people attempt suicide. Yes. It might take a year or 2 years after, but we do know that this is the highest amount of soldiers that have attempted suicide connected to the war.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for talking us through that, Tuly, a therapist and trauma expert, Tuly Flint.
may peace prevail